Welcome back to Fact Bloom Insights. World War II was one of the most chaotic times in human history. Over 70 million people lost their lives. Entire cities were burned to the ground. Some would say the fate of the entire world hung in the balance. Hey, but how much do you actually know about it? From the Battle of Britain to D-Day, here are 10 facts about World War II they never taught you in school. Number 10. The first bombs. It's no secret that the United States was the first country to ever use nuclear weapons in combat. But what is lesser known is that the Americans weren't the first to drop bombs during World War II. That honor goes to Nazi Germany. On September 1st, 1939, German forces marched into Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. 2 days later, the Germans dropped a bomb on Warsaw, killing dozens of civilians. This was done to scare the Polish people into submission, but it didn't work. The bombing of Warsaw is considered to be the first air raid of the war. And while it wasn't as deadly as some others, it certainly caught the Poles off guard. In fact, many of them had no idea what had happened until the dust settled. A lot of the early bombings were like this, low casualties. Until the big one on London. No. 9. The Blitz. For many people, the Battle of Britain is considered to be the most pivotal moment in all of World War II. After the fall of France, Great Britain stood alone against the might of Nazi Germany, and for a time, it seemed like the Germans would win. The Luftwaffe began an intense bombing campaign that lasted for 8 months. They targeted everything from military installations to civilian areas. At the height of the Blitz, London was being bombed every single day. People were forced to take shelter in the tube stations as the German bombers flew overhead. Winston Churchill famously declared, "We shall fight on the beaches." But even he knew this wouldn't be easy. The Blitz ended up killing over 40,000 British people. To put that in perspective, that's about the same as 9/11's, except it went on for months. The British people were determined not to give up, and by the end of it, their tenacity paid off. The Royal Air Force had managed to shoot down more enemy aircraft than they lost. This victory gave Britain the breathing room they needed to come back and fight another day. No. 8. Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941 is a date which will live in infamy. That morning, Japanese forces launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Battleships were sunk, thousands of Americans were killed. The attack caught the U.S. completely off guard, and many felt the isolationist policies of President Franklin D. Roosevelt had left them vulnerable. The attack on Pearl Harbor had a profound impact on the American people. It's estimated that over 2,000 were killed and 1,000 wounded. The attack also resulted in the deaths of over 2,000 U.S. servicemen. The United States was still recovering from the Great Depression when the attack occurred. This led many people to believe that FDR had purposely allowed Japan to attack in order to get the country into the war. However, historians now believe that FDR did everything he could to stop the attack, but just didn't know it was coming. Following the attack, Congress declared war on Japan. Within 2 short years, the U.S. would play a major role in defeating the Axis powers. No. 7. Island hopping. One of the most important theaters of World War II was the Pacific. Here, the Japanese Empire was at its greatest extent. They controlled vast areas of land that stretched from Korea to Australia. In order to defeat Japan, the Allies needed to take back these islands. This led to something called island hopping. This was a strategy employed by the Americans which involved bypassing heavily defended islands and taking smaller, less defended ones. This allowed the Allies to gradually push the Japanese back. Island hopping was a brutal affair. Many islands changed hands several times before finally being secured by the Allies. It also resulted in some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Despite this, it proved to be an effective strategy, and eventually the Allies were able to reach mainland Japan. When this happened, the Japanese emperor finally surrendered. This brought an end to World War II. While the fighting had largely ended in Europe, many Americans still had to fight in the Pacific. In fact, the last major battle of the war was fought between the U.S. and Japan. This was the Battle of Okinawa. It was one of the most horrific battles of the Pacific and resulted in tens of thousands of casualties. But ultimately, the Japanese were defeated. This paved the way for the Allies to occupy Japan and bring the war to an end. No. 6. Spies. Espionage played a huge role during World War II. In fact, there were spies everywhere. The Americans had spies in Japan. The Japanese had spies in the United States. The British had spies in Germany, and so on. One of the most famous spies of all time was Juan Pujol Garcia. He was a Spanish man who spied for both sides during the war. Eventually, he defected to the British and became known as Garbo. His missions included feeding false intelligence to the Nazis. At one point, he even convinced the Germans that an invasion of Ireland was imminent. Another famous spy was Virginia Hall. She was a British agent who operated behind enemy lines in France. Her mission was to gather intelligence on the Germans. She was captured in 1943 and sent to a concentration camp. But she escaped and returned to England. There she continued to work for the British government. Her bravery and determination made her a legend. In total, there were hundreds of spies operating during the war. Some were successful, others were caught. But all of them played a part in winning the war. No, 5. Unintentional target. Not all targets during World War II were intentional. Sometimes innocent people were caught in the crossfire. One of the worst cases of this was the Dresden bombing. On February 13, 1945, the British and Americans dropped bombs on the city of Dresden. The target was supposed to be a nearby military installation, but the bombs fell short. This caused massive damage to the city and resulted in the deaths of over 25,000 people. Most of those killed were German civilians. The Dresden bombing was one of the worst tragedies of the war. It's since been called the worst air raid in history. No. 4. Secret weapons. Both sides developed some truly terrifying weapons during the war. The Germans came up with the V-1 and V-2 rockets. These were some of the first ever guided missiles, and they were used to great effect. In fact, over 3,000 V-2 rockets were fired at London during the war. The British had their own secret weapon too. It was called the Colossus. This was one of the first ever computers, and it was used to break German codes. With the help of Colossus, the British were able to read messages that would have otherwise taken years to decipher. The Germans were also working on a new type of aircraft. It was called the V-7. This was a flying bomb, and it was designed to be virtually undetectable. Only a few were ever built, and none saw any action. No. 3. The Forgotten Soldiers World War II was fought by soldiers from all over the world. In fact, there were over 100 different nationalities who fought in the war. But the contributions of some of these soldiers are often forgotten. One group of soldiers who deserve special mention are the Gurkhas. These men were from Nepal and they fought for the British Army. They were known for their bravery and skill in combat. In fact, there has never been a Gurkha casualty in war. Another group of soldiers who deserve recognition are the Navajo code talkers. These men were from the Navajo Nation and they served in the U.S. Marine Corps. They were responsible for transmitting secret messages that were impossible for the Japanese to decode. Their efforts played a major role in winning the Pacific theater of the war. Unfortunately, many of these soldiers were treated very poorly after the war. They were often not given the proper recognition or benefits that they had earned. In some cases, they were even discriminated against. For example, the Navajo code talkers were not allowed to speak their native language in public. This was done in order to keep their code a secret. But it ended up doing more harm than good. In fact, it led to the Navajo people losing their language. Fortunately, things have changed a lot since then. Today, these soldiers are finally getting the recognition they deserve. One of the darkest chapters in human history is the Holocaust. During World War II, the Nazis carried out a systematic genocide of Jews throughout Europe. An estimated 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. This was done in gas chambers, concentration camps, and through other means. The Holocaust was one of the most horrific events of the war, and it's a reminder of the evils of racism and intolerance. It's important to remember the victims of the Holocaust and to learn from the mistakes of the past. No. 1. The legacy. The legacy of World War II is a complicated one. The war had a profound impact on the world, and its effects are still felt today. On the one hand, the war led to the formation of the United Nations. This organization was created with the goal of preventing future wars. It's also led to the development of new technologies and a greater understanding of the world around us. On the other hand, the war also led to the development of nuclear weapons, also resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent people. Ultimately, the legacy of World War II is up to each individual to decide. It was a war that changed the world forever, and make sure to stay tuned for more videos like this one.